Good morning again. So today we are leaving behind 1 Samuel, which we worked through for the last about 8 or 10 weeks. And we're going to launch a new sermon series. And it's called A New Kind of Presence. You can see that on the front of your bulletin. And it actually began as a project within the elder board. And it's a list of practices for spiritual formation. The elders talked about what is it we want to accomplish as a group, as an elder board, and leading the church. And we came to the conclusion that there are a lot of things that are important that we do, shepherding and so forth. But the most important thing that we can do is bring a godly and a Christ-like presence to our leadership. So there are 6 practices, and what this sermon series is going to be, we're going to take one each Sunday, and we're going to unpack it, and we're going to talk about it. And for one thing, you can see what the elders are committed to, and we're deeply committed to this. We're deeply committed to spiritual formation as a community, and really as a principle of leadership, as the cornerstone principle of leadership. But it occurred to us who do the preaching around here, the preaching team, that each of us has spheres of influence that God has given to us. God has called each of us really to a certain kind of leadership. So in our families, our neighborhoods, our workplaces, and it's sort of a symptom of our times, I think, to a large extent, but we tend to major on skill and technique. So we think, well, things will go well with the people around me and my influence on them if I can just read the right book, right? Or if I can just see get the right 4-step program. But again, our conviction here is that the most important thing we bring to any of these contexts, it is our presence. So we're going to look at some of the things that God uses to transform us into Christ, so that our presence isn't anxious, worried, or fearful, but that we're joyful, hopeful, and content. And that will begin to spill out to the people around us, and those are the things that will begin to shape our influence. So that's what this series is all about, and that's what we're going to be doing here for the next 6 Sundays. So the first of these, where we're starting, it might surprise you, we're going to start with Sabbath keeping, the practice of Sabbath keeping. And here's a description of what we think Sabbath keeping is, why we think it's important, and this is right off we're calling it a rule of living that the elders have agreed to and that we've all committed to. So this is written right off the elders' rule. And this is, we begin a lot of meetings by going back over these and kind of talking about how these are going in our lives. So we say, we believe that God has created us with a need to rest from the toils of life. The Sabbath provides a time when we can enjoy the good things with which God has blessed us, remembering His divine presence and faithfulness to us. So we'll set aside one day each week for physical, emotional, and spiritual rest. So this is what the heart of Sabbath keeping is all about. And we're going to get to some of these that we think of as more central. There's a sense in which this isn't as central to the Christian life as Bible reading or prayer, but we do think it's foundational to the spiritual life in yet another sense, because it provides the space in our lives to pause and we realign our life around God. And another reason we're starting with is you have to consider your context. And in a suburban context, pausing, creating space, realigning your life around God is something that we desperately need. So it's a time for intimate communion with God. We can be with Him. We can celebrate the good things He's given to us. And as we're going to see, what happens is this gives us a deep and abiding kind of rest, and we begin to carry that with us into the rest of our lives. Sabbath rest actually begins to spread out, okay, from the one day. So Tim Keller tells a story, and it was back when he had pastored a smaller church in the Midwest for about 10 years. And then he moved to Manhattan, felt God's call to move to Manhattan and plant a church. Well, he told his wife that he'd go through a period of he committed to 3 years. He'd be working a lot. He'd be overworking, but it would be for a certain amount of time. And then he'd, rest from it. He'd back off. Well, as you can imagine, the 3-year mark came and went. Planning all that went into planning the church and all the time and preparation and work, ministry work that had to go into that. And then he begins to say things like, just give me one more month of this kind of pace, and then I'll back off. And then after that month, it's yet another month, and then I'll back off. And it just sort of went on and on like this. So he comes home one day and he hears the sound of breaking china. And so he goes around to the back porch or the back deck, their apartment there in Manhattan, and his wife's there with a hammer, and she has their wedding china out, and she's smashing these saucers, okay? She's got it all lined up, and she's smashing them. And of course, he thinks she's completely lost it. And he says, well, what are you doing? What are you doing to the wedding china, and what's the point? She looked up and says his words. She looked up and said, you aren't listening to me. So his wife had been protesting this sort of frantic, frenetic work pace that he'd been on. He says, you aren't listening to me. You don't realize that if you keep working these hours, you are going to destroy this family. I don't know how to get through to you. You don't see how serious this is. This, the smashing, this is what you're doing to this family. So they begin to talk, and he thought she's lost it, right? So he's surprised by how quickly she can sort of calm down and work through these things. And she talks about the pressures that he didn't even see, the blind spots that he had, the way that his overwork was putting pressure on this family. And so they come to some agreement. And the agreement really is, you're going to stop right now. You're going to back off this frenetic pace right now. But he wonders how she had gained control of herself so quickly. And he says, with a grin, she answered, well, Tim, it was no meltdown. Do you see these 3 saucers I smashed? And I nodded. Oh, I have no cups for them. The cups have broken over the years. I had 3 saucers to spare. So I'm glad you sat down before I had to break any more. Okay, so the game was rigged, but she won, right? So we live in a society that it not only encourages overwork, it's a kind of virtue, okay? It praises it. So it values productivity, accumulation, over balance and simplicity. So the balanced and simple life, we think of that as sort of quaint, and that's good for other people. But we very rarely would characterize that as successful. Right? Well, the problem is that a life of overwork leaves no space for the presence of God. There's no time to enjoy the gifts that He's given to us. Family, art, recreation. These are the things that make our lives worth living in the first place. And then, so what happens is we begin to live beyond the limits of our humanity. But God's plan is that we live moment by moment with Him. And in part, this means that we learn to live within the physical and spiritual boundaries within which He's called us to live. And so the Sabbath is something that helps us to do this. It helps us to live within the physical and spiritual boundaries that God's created you and me both with. And we can line our lives around the presence and the goodness of God. That's what Sabbath keeping does for us. So let's jump into the central passage. If you have your Bible, this is the NLT translation you'll see up here. But if you don't have that, don't fret. It's good to see it in a couple different translations. So turn over to Deuteronomy 5. Look at verses 12 through 15. It's a familiar text. Okay, this is the second statement of the 10 Commandments that's given to the people. And let's jump into it. Verse 12. God tells them, observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy, as the Lord your God has commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your ox, nor your donkey, nor any of your animals, nobody, nor any foreigner residing in your towns, so that your male and female servants may rest as you do. Now, the early Jewish Sabbath was actually called the Shabbat. And when you read a little about the Shabbat, it's this really cool scene. It began on Friday evening, actually the evening before Saturday, and there were 3 celebratory meals, and the first meal came on Saturday evening. So the people would light candles, they'd pray together. Before they went to bed, they'd actually say this quiet blessing over one another, and they'd enjoy simple laughter and rest. So there's no trips to the grocery, no busy trips to the grocery on a Friday evening. There's no internet, there's no cell phones. In short, this is definitely not suburbia. This is not suburbia. And then they woke up Sunday morning to a world they didn't have goals for. They didn't try to control it. They didn't try to manipulate it. They accepted the day from God. They enjoyed His calming presence in their lives. So there's a simplicity to it. There's nothing to be accomplished for them. It's just pure rest. But what happens is, and if you know your Bible, you know what happens. These things that they're commanded to do, they go from something that's good for them and what's good for their souls to rules and regulations that had to be followed. So there comes to be a kind of checklist mentality with it. So you will not do any work. So you can check that off, right? I took off from my job. Your family doesn't work. Check. You don't let your ox or donkeys work, right? Check. No foreigner residing in your towns. Check. So there becomes a kind of checklist mentality. And on the one hand, that seems easy. It seems easy to fulfill that. But on the other hand, it's actually quite trapping of us. Because the problem is that we can do all of these things without actually resting in God. We can fulfill all these rules and regulations without actually experiencing what it is that God had for us in the first place. So this is the way that we used to think, not that long ago, actually, within the last couple of years. This is the way we used to think about the Sabbath. Sabbath just meant that I would make sure that in all the things that I'm doing, the church work and the teaching work that I do, there's a day that I don't work at all. So we would oftentimes reserve Saturdays for a trip to Costco. Does anybody go to Costco? You know, busy and sort of what that's like. So there's actually a family in the church that every Christmas provides us with membership to Costco. And we're very, very grateful for that. But imagine us, our whole family, with the 5 kids, and going through the aisles of Costco. I do not find this to be a very restful enterprise. In fact, it takes me a couple hours to stop shaking from a trip through Costco. So it's not something that's restful. I'm merely fulfilling a kind of requirement. And there can be this checklist mentality about all the disciplines, any of the spiritual disciplines, even prayer, even Bible reading, believe it or not, can become legalistic, where we're going through the motions because we think there's a kind of merit in it, and we've come to call this legalism. Legalism stifles our joy one way or the other. So either we continue to do these things, we continue to practice the Sabbath, we continue to do these disciplines, but we find them drudgery, or more likely, we drop them altogether. And then we're robbed of the joy because God had us doing these for a specific reason that was for our flourishing. So the same goes for Sabbath keeping. So it's not a legalistic requirement, but it's actually something we should see as good for our souls. It helps us to slow down, live within healthy limits, both physical and spiritual. So legalism, this is something that Jesus is concerned with. It was a big thing in his day, and he actually addresses it in Mark 2. So check out this passage. One Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields, and as his disciples walked along, they began to pick some of the heads of grain. This agitated the Pharisees, because the Pharisees were the quintessential rule keepers. They were very good at this, right? And they thought that it brought them a kind of righteousness. So the Pharisees said to him, "Look, why are they doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath?" He answered, "Have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need? In the days of Abiathar the high priest, he entered the house of God and ate the consecrated bread, which is lawful only for priests to eat." So he's pointing out these examples of inconsistencies even within their own tradition. And he also gave some to his companions. Then he said to the Pharisees, this is very key, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. They had reversed it. They had gotten the order wrong. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. So Jesus recognizes that the Sabbath is actually there for us to flourish. It's not supposed to take value away from our lives by imposing all these burdens and regulations on us. It's actually supposed to infuse value into our life. But notice that Jesus doesn't nullify the command to keep the Sabbath. He doesn't take it away. He just changes the way that we think about it. Changes the way we think about it. There's a number of passages that describe what Sabbath rest is all about. So my thesis here is that Sabbath rest is actually it's not about a rule or regulation, it's about entering into a certain kind of life. Now what I want to have you do is we're going to read from Psalm 91, verses 1 through 4 together. I'm actually going to do something. I'm going to have everybody stand up and read this together. So stand up. This will be interesting because you'll get to see who's having a Sabbath rest right now. And let's read through it. This is one example of the kind of life that the Sabbath is meant to help us enter into. Is it up here? Good. All right. Whoever dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress, my God in whom I trust. Surely He will save you from the fowler's snare and from the deadly pestilence. He will cover you with His feathers, and under His wings you will find refuge. Your faithfulness will be your shield and rampart. Very good. Okay, you can be seated. So this is what life looks like, even in the midst of danger, for those who are walking intimately, moment by moment, with Yahweh. So it's a portrait of understanding. It's a portrait of living in the goodness of God and remembering His love towards us. And it's this beautiful language, and it likens God to a mother bird caring for his baby birds. That's the kind of protection that we have. So the sort of person that puts himself in the care of the Almighty lives this kind of life with God, free from fear, And that's the kind of life that Sabbath keeping helps us to enter. And there should have already been hints of this for the people. Way back then in the Decalogue, in the Ten Commandments, Sabbath keeping is actually tied to freedom from slavery. So check out the rest of the passage. It says, "Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and that the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day." Now remember that the Israelite people, they were slaves in Egypt for a very long time. They were overworked. They were oppressed, both physically and spiritually. So freedom from slavery, this notion of freedom, is supposed to be part of their identity. They should remember it continually, and they should praise God because of it. And it's actually given as a reason why they would celebrate their rest on the Sabbath, because God intended freedom for them. Our tendency, we do the same thing, is to forget our freedom in Jesus. So we impose a sort of a self-imposed kind of freedom, kind of slavery. If we can't rest, we're slaves to work. But really, it's not the work that enslaves us. It's the compulsions. It's the reasons why we overwork. So here's an example. Think of the compulsion to meet the expectations of others. I think this is one of the reasons why we succumb to overwork. We can't say no because we want to please other people. We want to have them approve of us. Why do we do that? Well, for one, it seems to me that our identity is oftentimes wrapped up in what other people think of us, or at least what we perceive other people to think of us. That's how we define our worth and our identity. It causes anxiety. It causes stress, because the truth is, you can never really know what other people think of you. And you'll read things into their tone of voice. You'll read things into their gestures. But at the end of the day, you don't really know whether they approve of you or not. And secondly, you're never going to please them fully. Right? That's the way it works, working with people. And there's a profound slavery in being at the mercy of the opinions of others. But we can't rest from it in a lot of cases, so we overwork to meet expectations that are either there on us or they're perceived. Other times, we can't say no to people, and we can't sort of divorce ourselves from these expectations because we have an inflated sense of self-importance. There's a really interesting case in Exodus 18 where Moses is with the people, and really making a long story short, but they're en route to the promised land. And what he's begun to do is sit all day long, from morning to evening, very, very long days, and by himself, he judges the people. And this has become very, very consuming for him, to the point he sent his wife and children back home. Right? He's not seeing them. They're probably not being cared for in the way that they need to be cared for. So he sends them back home to Midian to the rest of their family. Well, his father-in-law, Jethro, confronts him about this. And basically he says, "What are you doing? Why are you carrying this whole burden all by yourself?" And I think it's interesting. Notice what Moses says. And I've added the emphases in here, okay? But it says, "Because the people come to me to inquire of God. When they have a dispute, they come to me, and I make known to them the statutes and instructions of God." So it's a very egocentric sort of thing. And I think just like Moses, we oftentimes can't imagine the world will get on well without us. We think the lives of those around us are going to fall apart. Or our lives are going to fall apart if we forgo this kind of rat race into which we enter ourselves each and every day. The same kind of story can be told for our compulsion, not just to meet the expectations of others, but towards accumulation, the need for security, whatever it is. They drive us to overwork, and we obsess. We obsess over these things. The result is all work and no rest. So Michael Zigarelli, I think I'm saying his name correctly, he's a professor in the Charleston Business School. And he conducted a study on 20,000 Christians, just interviewing them, talking to them, and observing their lives about overwork. Here are some of his conclusions. This is not the data from the survey. This is what he concludes based on that data. He says it may be the case that, 1, Christians are assimilating a culture of busyness, hurry, and overload, which leads to 2, God becoming more marginalized in Christians' lives. We should think, does any of this sound familiar? Which leads to 3, a deteriorating relationship with God. Which leads to 4, Christians becoming even more vulnerable to adopting secular assumptions about how to live. And a lot of these things that have to do with work and productivity and not resting. These are secular assumptions that do not fit in our view of things, our view of the world with Christ. Which leads to 5, more conformity to a culture of busyness, hurry, overload. See, you're back where you began, and the cycle begins again. And by the way, I want to add, busyness doesn't have to mean your 9 to 5 day work job. If you're, for instance, a stay-at-home parent, you can become just as perfectionistic, you can become just as overworked, and you're susceptible to all these kinds of things. So it takes a lot of forms. But then I think that, there needs to be some basis for assessing whether this is where we stand or not. So here are some signs of spiritual fatigue. All right, signs that we're caught in these compulsions of overwork, the things that cause them. So the first is irritability. This past week, I had a lot to do, and this is kind of a silly little story now that I'm telling it. But we're at the breakfast table together, and with 5 kids, there's constant requests. And so we finally get everybody settled, and then my wife wanted me to pass the strawberries. It's a really simple request. Well, I grabbed the strawberries in a way that would have embarrassed me if anybody had seen it, but now I'm telling you for some reason from the pulpit. I grab them, and I slam them down. I slam down the strawberries as if to say, I've had it. I got to get upstairs, and I have a sermon to work on Sabbath rest. So there's this irritability right? There's this irritability that sets in when we're fatigued, Restlessness, we can't sleep well at night. Or we wake often, we have insomnia, we can't get to sleep. Addiction to work, it becomes sort of like a treadmill, and we're addicted to it. We push off balance, and there's sort of a sick way in which it makes us miserable, but we want to keep working, okay? That's a sign. Escapist behaviors. So we hear a lot about addictions to pornography. This is a problem, even in the church. It's a big, big problem. But what we don't often talk about is why. Why does this happen? We focus on that behavior itself. A lot of times, and studies bear this out, this isn't just my opinion, viewing pornography, it's a kind of escapism from overwork and stress and anxiety. So one of the things that, not only does the problem of pornography need to be tackled head on, but we need to think about what the causes are too. Why are people's lives such that so many people, even Christians, are succumbing to this? Same goes for alcohol. Surfing the web, incessantly checking Facebook, Twitter, whatever it is. That's another sign. We avoid our spiritual practices because there becomes a sense in which we're uncomfortable to be alone with God and have our soul laid bare and open to Him. We don't like that, okay, because of all these compulsions that are there. We don't want God to see that. Now, He sees it anyway. You can't get away from it. But we pretend that. So if you have even a couple of these signs on a regular basis, you're probably spiritually exhausted and you're not getting enough Sabbath rest, plain and simple. Okay. So Sabbath keeping is one of God's solutions to this problem, to the problem of overwork, the compulsion of overwork. So when we Sabbath, we intentionally set aside time, traditionally 24 hours, and we realign our lives from this other stuff, and we align it around God. We relearn that we can trust Him and that we can walk with Him in all of life. He fills us with His presence, and instead of struggling to meet our own needs on our own terms with our own efforts, we begin to rely on Him. We begin to live this Psalm 91 kind of life. Here's how Tim Keller talks about Sabbath keeping. He says, the purpose of Sabbath is not simply to rejuvenate yourself in order to do more production. A lot of the things I read on Sabbath keeping, actually I chucked because this is the way they thought about them. Isn't that interesting? You need the Sabbath so that you can then be more productive. Now, there's probably some truth to that physiologically, but it's not, that's an unhelpful way of thinking about it. Nor is it the pursuit of pleasure. The purpose of Sabbath is to enjoy your God, life in general, what you have accomplished in the world through His help, and the freedom you have in the gospel, the freedom from slavery to any material object or human expectation. The Sabbath is a sign of the hope we have in the world to come. So when we Sabbath, we rest in His presence. We celebrate the many good things He's done for us. We rest with our family. We actually enjoy the outdoors. In the fall, we notice that the leaves have changed. We enjoy good music. We take a much-needed nap. We remember the freedom that we have in Jesus Christ. So then our Sabbath begins to extend into the rest of our lives. And it brings an abiding kind of rest even into our work. Okay, it's not about more productivity, but the way we work and the way in which we call upon God. Suddenly, it's different. And you're going at life not on your own, but you're going at life with God. Just like Paul says, we're co-laborers with Christ. So I said this before, but we used to think of the Sabbath as simply my not working. So the Sabbath was actually another day driven by goals. And we'd start the day by outlining what it is we need to accomplish that day. Okay? Isn't that ironic? And expectations, they were just a different kind of expectations. And I had all these signs of spiritual fatigue. And I still do when we lose our Sabbath rhythm. But we've recognized a deep wrong in this. We've recognized the joy of the Sabbath that we've been robbed of. So now we set aside at least one day. We separate ourselves from expectations, from this sort of goal-driven impulse. Separate ourselves from errands. We get rid of our cell phones. We've actually tried, show of hands if anyone, maybe I'm lying. Has anybody tried going off the grid? Anyone ever tried this? Go without electricity. No? Okay. It's hot in the summer. But it's cool. It's a good thing to do. So we've tried this, and it's been a profound blessing because now there's concentrated times for God in our lives. When we're with our kids, we're really there with them. We're not mentally somewhere else, and there's a kind of rest in it. So we intentionally redeem the time with things that make life worth living in the first place. So how do we do it? Let's close with some guidelines. How do we go about practicing the Sabbath? Well, here we go. This is not an exhaustive list, and there's seems to be some tension here with me saying before this wasn't a requirement. Well, it's not a requirement, but if you're going to practice the Sabbath, these are some things that I think will enhance it, okay? Make it what God intended it to be. So first, I think we should take at least one full day off per week and probably have several open evenings, okay? You can Sabbath on the evenings as well. You have nothing to do but practice the Sabbath. Let me say this. I do not think, and you can take me to task after this afterward if you want to, but there's no magical day, okay? You have to find out what day is best for you. If Sunday, in a lot of ways, is a work day for me. So if it's tied to a day, I break the Sabbath each and every week, despite everything I'm saying up here. It seems counterintuitive to me. So you find out what day is best for you. Second, the rest on these days should be a holistic kind of rest. Now, you can't incorporate everything I'm going to mention, I think, in one day. But you sort of, you spread it out across your Sabbath. So you need to incorporate things like contemplation of God. So alone time with Him. This probably should come every Sabbath. Everybody in the house should have some opportunity to do this. Times of just sheer inactivity, when you don't have anything to do. You're just kind of piddling around the house. Okay, like our kids do this all the time. Our kids are Sabbathing all the time. You incorporate recreation. You incorporate rest that's together with everyone. And then you incorporate individual rest as well. So at the Flum household, we have individual quiet times, often on the Sabbath. We'll have a candlelight breakfast. Try to have good music. We'll go take a hike in the park. That's what we did yesterday. We watched the Andy Griffith Show. We've all become very addicted to this, to the point where before it was just kind of a kids thing. Now if we miss an episode, like once the kids are in bed, we go back and rewatch it, just the two of us. So it's addictive. Don't start it. Sappy night. We call it Sappy night. I mean, it's part of this is because we have young kids, but songs and prayers. So every Saturday night, there's no Bible study or something like that to accomplish. We read the Bible, but we're sort of celebrating. We're celebrating God's presence with us. So we need rest in multiple dimensions and holistic kind of Sabbath. Third, we recognize that Sabbath rest will be different for each person based on personality and stage in life. So what the Sabbath for an introvert is going to look a lot different. Okay, so if you're an introvert and you're around people all week, part of the rest that you need is you're going to need more time alone. Okay, I describe myself as I'm on the extroverted side of being an introvert. And when Sabbath comes, man, I need time alone. An extrovert may really be refreshed and recharged by resting and enjoying God's gifts along with other people. So we just have to realize that our personality, even our stage in life, so for a stay-at-home parent versus an empty nester parent, these things are going to look probably quite a bit different. So you need to be honest, study yourself. Self-knowledge is one of the key things in the spiritual life, and decide, what does the Sabbath look like in my life? Fourth, we should plan for our days of rest. This one, we have learned this the hard way. And so I say we shouldn't be goal-driven. We shouldn't be goal-driven. On the other hand, it's very easy. Does anybody ever say this around your house on a day that you have off, whether you're Sabbathing or not? It's 3 o'clock already, right? It's already 3 o'clock. What have we done with this day? So, we don't want to be goal-driven. On the other hand, we don't want our Sabbaths to go by like that either. So holistic rest is going to happen only when we plan for it. So we need to think, what are we going to take into the Sabbath with us? Right? Are we bringing in the Bible with us? Are we bringing in prayer with us? Are we bringing in time with close family and friends with us? And what are we going to leave out? Am I leaving out my cell phone? Am I leaving out my computer? Am I leaving out Facebook? So we plan for that. Okay? At least a day in advance. Last thing, we recognize that, since maybe this is more autobiographical than anything, but take it for what you will. We recognize that Sabbath rest is not only physical, but it's also mental. So it's very difficult. One of the most difficult things for us is the battlefield of the mind, and it's being mentally present. So Caleb has just a detector for this. And the other kids will say, if I'm sort of mentally not there, Daddy, are you listening to me? Right? But Caleb's a little more intense, those of you who know him. So it's, Daddy, you're not listening to me. Right? And he's little, he's 4, but he catches on that this is hard for me. So we leave work behind mentally to focus on freedom. So we're created to live in regular rhythms of work and rest. We then align our lives around God, and we enjoy the good things that He's given to us. And He's given us so many things. But oftentimes there is a price for this, and the world defines success in a very narrow way, okay, in a very secular way. So we might find ourselves just not as successful as we thought we were going to be in the world's terms. This can be your work life. It can even be your home life. Come to our house sometime. Look at all the unfinished projects. It is a little shrine to the Sabbath. Right? Haven't been as successful as we wanted to be in that regard. But God's created us for freedom. God's created us for joy. Joy is this deep and abiding sense that all is well with the world. And Sabbath rest helps us to enter into that. Okay, we're going to have a chance to respond here in a minute. Let me pray to close the sermon. And then get out. Actually, just take a second to do it now before I pray. There's an insert in your bulletin that goes along with this. That's what we'll use for the response here in just a second. You'll have a chance to look at that. We'll have a couple minutes of silence to respond. And then we'll pray again. We'll pray again. So let me pray. So, Father, we want to enter the kind of life you have for us. We want to rest in a way that it's physical rest, because fatigue adds to anxiety, and that can affect us spiritually. Really, we're holistic beings. But we want spiritual rest. We want to enjoy the life that you have for us, the life in Christ, the life walking with Christ, and trusting Him, and knowing that you will care for us, you'll care for our needs. But it's so hard to do that when life is frantic. So we pray to give us the freedom from that. Amen.